first Star Wars movie hit theaters in 1977. That also happens to be the year home video games surged in popularity with the release of the Atari 2600. With a huge overlapping fan base, it's no surprise we've gotten lots of Star Wars games over the years. But just how many might surprise you. Here's a look at every Star Wars video game ever made. It was 1982 when the first official Star Wars video game came out. Set during the Battle of Hoth, The Empire Strikes Back put players in a snowspeeder and had them pelt AT-ATs with laser cannons to protect their base. The following year brought Jedi Arena, the first game to let players handle a lightsaber.
Play the Jedi Arena home video game.
Unfortunately, all you could do was block attacks from a remote ball. Exciting lightsaber combat would come later. Many more Star Wars games hit arcades in the 80s. Most of them revolving around space battles from the hit films.
Wait for me!
It wasn't until later that game makers started expanding the Star Wars universe by introducing new characters and storylines. Things started getting more exciting in the early 90s when a series of action platformers based on the movies hit Super Nintendo. You play as characters like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, blasting through enemies, exploring alien worlds, and piloting many of the vehicles from the films. In 1982, George Lucas had started a video game company that would eventually be called LucasArts. Ironically, it was barred from making Star Wars games because of a licensing agreement that predated the company. Instead, it found success making adventure games like Maniac Mansion and The Secret of Monkey Island. The red tape came down in 1993 when LucasArts released Star Wars X-Wing. This beloved series features original stories that either fill in gaps from the movies or go well beyond the scope of the original trilogy.
I told you not to get involved with the rebels.
The most cinematic Star Wars games in the early 90s were Rebel Assault and its sequel, The Hidden Empire. The games featured pre-rendered CGI video, complete with digitized music, sound effects, and voice acting. The sequel even had a live-action cast.
I didn't expect to find the likes of you here.
These impressive features were only possible because the games came exclusively on CD-ROM, a new format that could store more information than cartridges or floppy disks.
Capability previously unheard of.
Further filling out the expanded universe was the Jedi Knight series of first-person shooters. These games follow a former Imperial officer.
Excellent, Catan.
As he learns the truth about the Empire and makes a fresh start, first training as a Jedi and eventually teaching at the Jedi Academy.
You always sense a disturbance in the Force.
With a franchise as epic and long-running as Star Wars, it probably comes as no surprise that it's gotten its share of oddball games over the years. From educational titles
Games that make you think.
to browser games, we've gotten a little bit of everything from the Star Wars universe. Want to practice your second-grade arithmetic? Jedi Math has you covered.
15 minus 8.
Or perhaps you'd enjoy an interactive CD-ROM filled with Star Wars screensavers instead. Set during the events of the original trilogy, Rogue Squadron follows Luke Skywalker and his band of starfighters through nearly every battle in the films.
Biggs, Wedge, let's close it up.
Often more than once. The original Rogue Squadron was one of the first Nintendo 64 games to use the system's expansion pack to get a graphical boost. Fans had waited many years, but George Lucas and Company finally released new Star Wars movies starting in 1999. While The Phantom Menace got a lukewarm reception overall, most fans loved the pod racing sequence on Tatooine. LucasArts used that as the basis for a new series of Star Wars racing games. They even enlisted the actors who played Anakin Skywalker and Sebulba to provide voice acting.
You can run faster than your pod racer.
Not every Star Wars game from the 90s got a sequel. Some of the standalone games, like The Empire Strikes Back and The Phantom Menace, were based directly on the movies. Others veered off in all sorts of directions, including a Star Wars-themed chess game,
Oh dear.
and even a fighting game. But developers weren't done with the franchise yet. Many more games would come in the new millennium. Based heavily on gameplay established in the Age of Empires, Galactic Battlegrounds let players control a number of different factions as they collected resources, built an army, and conquered enemies ranging from Gungans to Wookiees. For fans who wanted more Phantom Menace in their life, Star Wars Starfighter showed the lead-up to the Battle of Naboo.
Droids are no match for human instinct.
The sequel, Jedi Starfighter, was released right before Attack of the Clones hit theaters, and is set prior to one of its major battles.
I sense that is not why you summoned me here.
One genre Lucas's mammoth franchise had yet to tackle was the MMO. That changed in 2003, when Star Wars Galaxies launched, giving players an enormous section of outer space to explore. The game would see a number of expansions over the years, but LucasArts finally pulled the plug in 2011. Winning multiple Game of the Year awards in 2003 is Knights of the Old Republic, an action RPG from BioWare,
You cannot win, Revan.
who would go on to create sci-fi games like Mass Effect and Anthem. The series even spawned Star Wars The Old Republic, a second Star Wars MMO that launched in 2011 and is still running today. Fans of digital pinball games who also appreciate Star Wars have been well served over the years, thanks mostly to Zen Studios. They've released many downloadable pinball tables based in a galaxy far, far away.
May the Force be with you.
2004 brought us the first iteration of Star Wars Battlefront, a team-based first and third-person shooter from Pandemic Studios. The game, and the sequel that came out the following year, let players choose a faction and participate in epic battles from the movies. If kids were feeling left out of the Star Wars video game fun, they would get a whole mess of family-friendly games starting in 2005, thanks to LEGO Star Wars. These lighthearted adventures stick close to the source material, but add a heap of jokes and LEGO puzzles along the way, and kicked off the long-running LEGO game series. Created by the makers of Command & Conquer, Empire at War is a real-time strategy game that takes place between the original and prequel trilogies. You could play as either the Rebel Alliance or the Empire in the core game, and an expansion added space pirates to the mix.
We are victorious.
The Force Unleashed was part of a major multimedia project overseen by George Lucas himself. It bridges the prequel and original trilogies, telling the story of Starkiller,
I do not serve the Emperor.
Darth Vader's apprentice, as he secretly fights against the Empire.
Rise, my apprentice.
These games were the centerpiece of the project, but they were also accompanied by a novel, action figures, Legos, comic books, a reference book, and a tabletop role-playing game. A huge number of handheld Star Wars games have been released over the years, including Obi-Wan Adventures and a pair of Battlefront spin-offs on the Sony PSP. But that number has been eclipsed by its massive presence on mobile, starting with pre-smartphone games like Grievous Getaway. In recent years, the number of console Star Wars games has plummeted, while it has skyrocketed on mobile. That's no coincidence. Mobile games like the popular Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes are cheaper to make than console games, and often more lucrative. The Star Wars games that arrived on console and PC in the 2000s have tackled the subject matter from a number of angles. One was a bizarre Mario Kart ripoff called Super Bombad Racing on PlayStation 2. Others branched out in various ways, like Kinect Star Wars and the massive arcade cabinet BattlePod. While some of these games are great, there's a good reason you haven't heard of most of them.
Another junk pile.
In 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm, the parent company of LucasArts.
Lots and lots of opportunities at Disney that we wouldn't have at any other studio.
That meant Star Wars characters could appear in the Toys to Life game Disney Infinity 3.0. But the joy was short-lived. Disney soon laid off nearly all LucasArts employees and decided to outsource Star Wars games in the future.
It's getting away!
For a variety of reasons, not all Star Wars games in development have made it to market. Many of these casualties happened in 2013 when Disney canceled all the projects LucasArts was working on. Visceral Games' Star Wars project, codenamed Ragtag, will never see the light of day in its current state. Perhaps the biggest loss was Star Wars 1313, a gritty shooter that revolved around everyone's favorite intergalactic bounty hunter, Boba Fett.
It gets a lot dirtier where we're headed.
Still, for Star Wars fans, the future looks as bright as an exploding Death Star. 2015 brought a Star Wars Battlefront reboot that let players take part in battles from the original trilogy. The sequel adds content from the prequel trilogy, along with a full single-player campaign.
The Empire's time has come.
That brings the Star Wars video game saga to a close for now. But with the film franchise on an annual release schedule, there's no doubt we'll see lots of Star Wars games in the years to come. If you like this content, then make sure to follow IGN's Every Ever on Facebook for everything on the world's most iconic games, characters, and franchises. If it's need to know, it's in this show.